Welcome back to Max Out, everybody. Today is a very, very special day for me. I'm honored to have this gentleman on our program. I was telling him as we got started, his father was my hero. I wrote my college dissertation on his dad, and the more that I've got to know more about him, I count him as another one of my heroes. And so I'm honored to have him here during Black History Month, but I'll be honored to have him here any day of any month of any year. So Martin Luther King III, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm so honored to join you today.
Well, you join us at such an interesting time in our culture and in our world. And by the way, everybody, as we go through this day, I want to have a really productive conversation. So give Martin and I both a little bit of grace. If you don't agree with someone's politics or viewpoint, you get into these topics, you can have the surface conversation, then really nothing gets accomplished, or you can really talk about things that are a little bit uncomfortable. And so if I use the wrong word or phrase something the way you don't like, just know my intention is progress. And I know that that's Mr. King's as well. So give us some grace as we have this beautiful conversation. So I'll give you some, Martin, that's for sure.
Thank you. And vice versa.
Wonderful. So how do you feel about where things are in the world right now? It's obviously been an interesting year. The progress side, we elected the first ever African-American, she's multi-ethnic, but Black woman as the vice president of the United States, comes off after electing a few years back our first Black president. Yet the George Floyd incident happens, which shed light on the systemic problems that we still have in society. It was an interesting year that way. How do you feel about the state of race and social issues in the United States right now, particularly in our country?
So that's a very, very interesting question, because I feel I always try to look at things in a positive way, as opposed to, you could look at a cup as half empty or half full. While I certainly am not happy about the divisions that exist in our nation, and I think it's healthy to have debate and discussion, but I think we as human beings, being, from my perspective, the highest creation of God, should operate in a different and more civil way, even if we disagree. I think my father showed us how to disagree without being disagreeable through his techniques. Whether you agreed with him or not, you had to hopefully respect the manner in which he approached an issue. So what I'm disappointed about is that in 2021, or certainly in 2020, but certainly as well 2021, we still have not addressed one of the evils that my father characterized as a triple evil. And he talked about eradicating from our nation poverty, racism, and he said militarism, but I sort of changed militarism to violence. So poverty, racism, and violence. Racism is where I'll start. Very, very briefly, because we are far better as a nation and as human beings than much of the behavior that we see exhibited from time to time. And so we find ourselves at a crossroads where we were operating as a divided state of America as opposed to a united states of America. And so we've got a myriad of issues to address, but I just believe that when it comes to racial intolerance and racial justice, I mean, I was very certainly proud to see more civil rights demonstrations. I should first say, tragically, seeing the death of George Floyd it certainly impacted millions of people. Why do I say that? I think because for the first time, and it may be probably because of the pandemic, the tragedy of the pandemic, people were at home watching it immediately on the news, seeing an officer whose job is to protect and serve becoming judge, jury, and seemingly executioner all in one. And so it didn't feel right. What it caused was massive demonstrations all over our nation, but not just our nation. We had demonstrations in every state of our nation the largest civil rights demonstrations ever. That has never happened. Many of those were led by young white people and older white people in some communities. I remember an older white woman in Arkansas saying that when that young man called for his mother, it galvanized mothers all over the place, and all over the place literally, because demonstrations were taking place in Europe. Demonstrations were taking place in Australia. Demonstrations were taking place on the African continent. Demonstrations were taking place in South America, and demonstrations in Canada, along with the United States. So these have been the largest demonstrations that we've ever seen in our lifetime. Now, to me, what that means is our world acknowledged that there is a problem that we have to address. You know, you can act as if it doesn't exist. For many years, we didn't talk about it. Under President Obama, you know, we acted as if we were post-racial, but it was real. And we should have had those discussions back then. But certainly, you know, what President Trump probably one day, when we evaluate it truly, he helped to bring the issue out because of the way he chose to approach it. Not so much from a resolution standpoint, but the fact that he gave people who had racial views a level of comfort now so that they could do and say anything. So now we know that the problem exists, and now we can begin to address it as a collective, and not just in the United States, because this problem is a global problem.
Yeah, a lot of my Black friends have said to me, you know, I've had friends of mine say, you know, wow, there's really more of this now. And they're saying, no, there's just cell phones. It's a little bit easier to prove, you know, to reveal it. And so I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think sometimes people think, wow, this stuff's really on the rise. Well, my friends tell me this isn't on the rise. This is just coming to the light finally, to your point. And so I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I just thought I'd make that point for people that are
thinking. Very valid point.
Yeah.
Oh, only thing else I was going to add was that, again, Dad talked about poverty, racism, and violence. In our nation, we purport to have about 45 million people living in poverty. But if you talk to Reverend William Barber, who leads the Poor People's Movement and campaign, and you may know I'm sure, just because of your research, but I don't know if all those who are listening may know. My father, his last campaign that he was working on was called the Poor People's Campaign, where he was attempting to mobilize poor Blacks and poor whites and poor Native Americans and Hispanic and Latino and Asian Americans from all walks of life, to galvanize people to say, look, we want to create the climate for a decent job with decent pay, a living wage. Yes. And of course, he did not live to see that come to fruition. That was to have taken place in May of 1968. He was killed in April of 1968. But my higher point is there are some who say statistical data says 45 million people roughly. Well, Reverend Barber and other institutions say there are well over 100 million people in the United States who are living at the poverty level, particularly families of four or two, a mother and a father and two children. And when you look at the wages, they really are poverty wages. Now, that really should be unacceptable in the United States of America, particularly when you have trillions and trillions of dollars circulating, even with a very difficult economy. It's obviously with the pandemic, there are different dynamics now than perhaps have existed. But prior to the pandemic, you know, the question becomes, why do we continue to allow in this nation with all the abundance that exists? I mean, there's an unlimited amount of abundance, but we don't operate and live that way because we choose to embrace something different. And so as a result, we have millions of people that really do need help. And I don't mean necessarily giving a man a fish. There are people that we will have to provide food for, maybe always. But if you teach people how to fish, they can feed themselves and their families for a lifetime. And somehow we missed that along the way. So again, addressing racism, addressing poverty, and then violence is something that we have allowed as well to exist. We've created a culture of violence through, television programming or movies, through cartoons, even through our gaming industry. The kids play all kinds of games. So if we want to, maybe we need to think about how do we change the culture so that maybe we can create a culture of nonviolence, a culture that's uplifting, that's more wholesome. And maybe these are values that we as a society need to look at. I'll stop.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around. If you'd like more, click the videos right here. They're exactly what you need to see next. And if you're new here, hit subscribe and become a part of the Max Out community. And tell me what you think about the videos in the comments below. I read all of them every week, and I select winners that get all kinds of prizes, gear, coaching calls with me. Make a comment.